Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Happy to be with you once again to set the stage for what is going to be a very busy August here in Happy Valley. Our coverage of preseason camp is going to hit a different level this weekend at Lions247.com. On Saturday, we will be inside Penn State facilities for conversations with head coach James Franklin, all three coordinators, all the position coaches, and as many players as we can get to, as our staff can handle in about a few hours of time. Later that day, we'll get out into the practice field. We'll have a chance to observe as much as we can during our window, get a look at offense, defense, perhaps the special teams, new players. Going to be a lot of fun with the photo galleries coming off our first look at practice. So a ton coming your way. First things first, though, we have our second episode of the podcast this week, and it is our second on the step chart. If you missed the other, it dropped on Wednesday. It's focused on the offensive position battles we're going to be reviewing throughout this month and perhaps beyond into the season. This time around, we look at the defense, which is under new management, new defensive coordinator Jim Knowles making this splashy move from Columbus, Ohio. He is the highest paid coordinator in college football and certainly did not inherit an empty cupboard in terms of talent. Bringing on Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen now to help break down that side of the ball. And gentlemen, again, we are working our way towards seeing this team. I know I was kind of hyping it up last episode. On August 1st, we have a deal available for you. And Mark, are you able to kind of put that out? Because this episode is dropping August 1st. I know you were tentative to put out the details beforehand because of some legalese perhaps, but can we do it now?
Yes, 50% off a annual VIP subscription. It's a really good deal. Listen, I think everybody's noticed that we've put more of an emphasis on VIP type coverage, and it actually paid off really well for us and for subscribers back in the early summer when we were one of the network leaders in subscriptions sold during a promotion. So if you weren't able to get in then, get in now, half off. It'll take you through this time next year. And once you're through with the promotional period, you're able to get free Paramount Plus. So it's a really good deal, and I encourage people to do it. I hope people realize that we don't come on this show and, we aren't hucksters trying to push this constantly. But when there is an opportunity for people to save some money, start of a new season, expectations are really high for Penn State. Let's see if they can live up to it. Let's see if they can get it done when it needs to get done. But this is an opportunity for you to save some cash. So we're letting people know 50% off, limited time.
There you go. Jump on board preseason coverage. I'm about halfway through as you record what's going to be a 2,000-word piece looking at a lot of key topics based on conversations we've had with people in Penn State facilities. Not a free article over at our website. So we'd love to have you on board. Let's focus on defense now. Jim Knowles comes to town. Daniel, this will be the third defensive coordinator the fourth defensive coordinator you have covered. It's been a quick changeover. I know. I had to do the math there.
Daniel's the defensive coordinator killer.
First year covering the team, 2021. Brent Pry was the DC. He leaves for a head coach job at Virginia Tech. He's facing a very important year down there with the Hokies if he wants to keep it. But you're also looking at Manny Diaz following that up after being Miami's head coach. And then after being Indiana's head coach, it's Tom Allen after Diaz leaves for his own program leadership job with Duke. Tom Allen makes a lateral move. He's DC at Clemson, but along the way, it's been a very good defense. I would say the 2023 version is probably the best we have seen, the one under Manny Diaz, his second year here. But last year, certainly no slouch. They had the top defensive player in football in Abdul Carter, and around him, they had a group that ranked top 10 and very important categories across the board, one of the final four teams playing. So, Daniel, now that we're on defensive coordinator number 4, and it was certainly the splashiest pickup of any of them, what is big picture your thoughts about this side of the ball, maybe based on what you heard in Las Vegas and kind of what you've seen for yourself over the course of recent months?
I think the big thing that stands out to me and one of the, topics of conversation out in Las Vegas is looking at the different areas where guys are going to have to step up. Penn State didn't lose. It doesn't feel like they lost a lot from that defense last year, especially when you look at, who got drafted and whatnot. But there are a couple holes like here and there that, that Penn State has recruited well. You've stockpiled the roster. You have talent, but it's just a question of getting these guys experience and looking at who can step up. I think it's one of those situations where it's like the only way to get experience is to actually get experience. And a lot of guys on this defense are in that boat, especially when you look at the defensive line, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I think that's what stands out to me is that you've got some really good pieces like a Zachy Wheatley, like a Denai Dennis Sutton, like an AJ Harris. But then next to them, you're going to have guys who are stepping into larger roles, guys who are going to need to take steps forward.
Yeah. Mark, you've covered a few more than 4 defensive coordinators here on the Penn State football beat going back to the 1980s.
It really wasn't that many. I mean,
certainly more turnover.
Let's forget about one of them. Let's forget about one of them.
That's certainly true. But I think this has always kind of been a calling card. We have seen some really bad spans for the Penn State offense. You've unfortunately had to cover them. But it feels like when people talk about what they do in Happy Valley, defense, LBU, it's really a part of that calling card. And James Franklin has been quick to note that every single time they hire a new defensive coordinator, whether it was Manny Diaz or Tom Allen, guys who had their own track record, he would say, well, we feel really good about what we've established here. We don't need to reinvent what we do here at Penn State. But let's be honest, when you pay a coordinator more money than any coordinator has ever been paid in college football, and you bring him in from the defending champions who beat you 8 straight times and kept you out of the end zone in Beaver Stadium last November, it rings a little bit differently. We're a ways removed from that power move for James Franklin and Pat Kraft to bring in Jim Knowles, but it reverberated around college football. Now that we're going to see what it really looks like on the field, Mark, what do you make of that decision to go get him and to bring him on board and to get to the point where we are now, where this is one of the more interesting subplots across the college football landscape in 2025?
Well, we're here at the Major League Baseball trading deadline as we're recording this, and you're seeing teams go all in. And it seems to me as if this is Penn State going all in, having a pretty good feel for what they were going to have back this year and realizing that, this is an opportunity to do something special. So why not go out and spend some money? And I give Pat Kraft a lot of credit for giving James Franklin the resources and the administration and everybody else. I mean, it's here. This is it. This is your opportunity. So you might as well go all in. I think the one unique thing about this situation is when we've talked about great Penn State defenses, you mentioned it. It's always been linebacker U. And to me, that's the gigantic question on this defense is, who is going to step up at linebacker U? I mean, I had you send me the snap counts from last season. This was back going into the spring when we were talking about, kind of positions to watch. And outside of Tony Rojas, 656 snaps, you had Dom DeLuca at 337, if my eyesight is not failing me. And beyond that, you're basically less than 100 when you think of Tamir Robinson rolling out. So you have, you obviously have Campbell coming in, a guy who played a lot of football at North Carolina, but Rojas, the guy you think you could hang your hat on, we haven't seen him since last season. Now, albeit he played really well to his best football toward the end of last season, but then has a shoulder procedure and didn't do anything in the spring. We're told he's full go. He looked full go when we saw him in the weight room availability earlier last month, I guess it would be when people actually see this. But my point is there's just that's the one spot. I know there are questions elsewhere, but generally speaking, D-line, you have guys who are proven that you could kind of, you're not at every single spot, but who are going to be kind of the cornerstone. Secondary, you have guys who have gotten it done that are you're going to be your cornerstone in the secondary. But at linebacker, I mean, I think that's just a huge glaring question mark. I think Rojas can be really, really good, even better than last year. But do I know for sure? No, I don't. I think Campbell can step in and be a really good player in the Big Ten, but do I know for sure? No, I don't. And then where's depth? So to me, that's the interesting thing is you bring in this new coordinator with all these accolades, but then it's going to be a little bit different from some of the great Penn State defenses that we've seen because it's not necessarily all LBU. I give Dan Connor, and I know I'm rambling on here, I give Dan Connor credit because he's kind of the linebackers coach, because he's kind of playing off of that, saying, everybody's talking about the linebackers. Everybody's talking about, and that's great. Dan Connor was a great linebacker. He's a great motivator. But as you look at it, that to me is the question mark going into preseason camp on either side of the ball. I think it's even more of a question mark than wide receiver.
Let's just go to linebacker now because you already brought us into that room.
Yeah, sorry.
I would certainly make the case, and I will during the show, that there is a greater area of concern on the defensive side of the ball in terms of position groups than linebacker. But let's talk about what linebacker could look like, because we've been told we're going to see with regularity a 4-2-5 scheme from Penn State's defense, which is going to remove a linebacker from the equation. That's not all out of the ordinary for what we've seen from Penn State, and bringing in the fifth defensive back in that slot coverage, the nickel, the star, whatever they've called it over the years. We've seen that, but it could have more prevalence in this particular defense. So who is that taking off the field? When we start talking about the primary linebackers here, I think it's a pretty cut and dry conversation, Daniel, because you've got three that have really done it extensively at this level. Dom DeLuca, as Mark referenced, he had a career high, over 300 snaps last year on defense. He was banged up, limited a bit by that thumb hand injury for portions of the season, but he's going to be a third-year captain this year, a fifth-year senior. And if you've got eyes on Dom DeLuca, Mark, I know you did in the weight room, I mean, he has really bulked up. I don't think he could maximize his physique more. He is ready for battles in the Big Ten. I think we can all kind of say Dom DeLuca is if you need him to play 30 snaps on defense, he can get that job done. We probably weren't sure this time last year. I know he was banged up a little bit. I feel pretty good about Dom DeLuca playing a lot of football. But then Amari Campbell, he goes from being the kind of the focal point of North Carolina's bad defense, the guy who was wearing the green dot, calling the defense on the field, gets 6 sacks. He had more than 20 pressures according to Pro Football Focus. And he's somebody that was outstanding at knowing when to dial it up in the A gap, the B gap, those interior blitzes, and did a lot of good things. But again, you're plucking him out from being maybe the most productive player on one of the worst defenses in the ACC and saying, well, who are you when we put you on the field with all these beasts? Guys who have been in the college football playoff, guys who have played in the Big Ten championship. And so you tack on Tony Rojas, and I don't want to shortchange him, but Mark laid it out pretty well. I think he's definitely due for a step. There's probably as much excitement around him as any defender inside the Lasch building about where he can go from last year to this year. Part of that is he's healthy now. Part of it is he has another year at linebacker. At the end of the day, there's a lot of hype around him, and I'm willing to buy that as well. So, Daniel, the top three, if you're maybe going to lean on two, that's kind of a fun competition here. If you got two guys who are going to get the bulk of work, what's the right combination? We'll get into some of the depth pieces at linebacker in a second, but for me, is it Dom DeLuca working off of Tony Rojas, which we got to see actually take place last year? And, of course, Kobe King was a centerpiece last year and team captain. Now he's with the Minnesota Vikings as a rookie. But is it Amari Campbell playing off of Tony Rojas? Those guys have a history. It's a part of the reason why Penn State, trusted its evaluation and felt like he'd be a cultural fit was that background with Tony Rojas. Do you let them play off their instincts among each other? So I think that's a really fun thing. If Jim Knowles is really going to go heavy on a 5 defensive back scheme, and looking at the roster, you'd understand why he'd be inclined to do that from a talent perspective as well. But it's going to leave one of these guys off the field, maybe taking starters reps off the table for them. And I'm very intrigued because I think Tony Rojas is the least likely to spend time on the sideline this fall.
Yeah, I think going into the season that Tony Rojas is going to be an every down player in that defense. And we know that he has the athleticism that if Jim Knowles gets, brings back the Prowler package and they do some different things with that, Rojas would, definitely fit with that kind of scheme and being able to play in space. I think with Campbell and DeLuca, they're different types of players, which I think factors into it a little bit. We saw DeLuca in sort of that Sam role last year when he was on the field, where he would do some things in space, be out in coverage a little bit. And Campbell is sort of that Mike from North Carolina. I'm really interested to get eyes on him. It's the thing that you kind of mentioned, where you take him off that North Carolina defense, which had a lot of struggles, put him in this Penn State defense where he's going to be surrounded by excellent players. And it's that thing that we talk about with kind of like the freshmen come in, where what does he look like next to these guys? How does his movements compare? How does his size compare? I think that's something I'm really interested in getting eyes on when we finally get this practice access this weekend and beyond. But I think it's going to be a competition, and I think it's one of those things where the nature of the position is that you can rotate guys through dependent on the opponent, make different tweaks in different situations, things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a we'll see. I mean, I think that it's pretty easy to want to pencil in Amari Campbell in next to Tony Rojas, given what he accomplished at North Carolina. But Dom DeLuca has accomplished a lot in his own right here at Penn State. and is someone that we know the coaching staff has a ton of respect for and the team has a ton of respect for. So not going to go down without a fight, and strikes me as one of these battles that could carry on into the season, depending on how things shake out these next couple of weeks.
If you are doubting Dom DeLuca, you have not been paying attention to his Penn State career thus far. And Mark, I want to get into the depth here because this is where I see it maybe being a separating factor. Look, Kobe King's a big piece to replace. I was a big Kobe King fan, and imagining this team, if he was a fifth-year senior right now, you'd feel pretty excellent about the situation. But he's not here. He's in the NFL. And so I'm wondering if they can bring in game changers off the bench. Can that happen over the course of a game? Because you look at what they had last year, it was Kobe King, Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, and who was next up? Well, you mentioned Tamir Robinson was close to 100 snaps. It was Tyler Elsdon, it was a fifth-year senior, and I don't think anyone would describe him as a game changer coming off the sideline last year. He was a steady presence. He was a veteran guy. He was a body they needed. But that was your next man up at linebacker, essentially. Tamir Robinson didn't take the step forward we thought last year in terms of usage. Part of that was because of an early season injury. And then Dakari Nelson, who switched over from safety in preseason camp, started one game in place of Dom DeLuca in the Big Ten opener, and that was pretty much a non-factor defensively the rest of the season. And so we've got to wrap our heads around what's coming out the side, and I kind of like it, though. Anthony Specca, if you listen to this podcast last year, you remember I kept calling for him, maybe getting more opportunities. I think those opportunities are going to come in a significant way late August into September in non-conference action. I like his chances to really prove he belongs out there. And then Kari Jackson, the other redshirt freshman who came to town last year. He has not played much football, missed his senior high school season because of an injury, missed last season because of an injury, but he has lost about 10 pounds. He is in a really good place in terms of being more of a sideline to sideline linebacker than a just north-south thumper, which is kind of what he was at the high school level. And I've heard from inside team facilities that he is arguably the most intimidating hitter in this group. So that's something to hear about a guy who hasn't played in a game yet, that he's a bit of a presence out there. But Keon Wiley's kind of a wild card for me, Mark, because he's a guy that we all, I think, we're thinking, he was going to take a step forward last year, be a two-deep component. He's lost in spring ball, misses his redshirt sophomore season, and here he is. He's the last linebacker from that 22 class. It was him and Abdul Carter, and we all want to know what he's got on the field. We've seen him getting a little bit of reps as an edge rusher. I don't know if that's more of a situational focus or what during the spring, but he's somebody that I think can stay healthy. He's got the physique. If he can go and kind of build off what we saw from him as a redshirt freshman, then you include Specca, you include Kari Jackson. Who knows with Alex Taish and LeVar Arrington as freshmen? I think Taish is closer to playing. Cam Smith, by the way, on campus. I think Daniel has mentioned that before. There's some intrigue with Taish's size, but I just feel like there are more body types and more maybe blue chip talent that we can work our way through beyond the obvious top three than what we had last year. They got to go out and prove it to us in game action. But I think Dan Connor has the pieces. We just haven't seen it yet. I think he has.
But that's my point. I mean, when I say that there's a question mark with every single guy outside of DeLuca, who, I mean, and, I mentioned that because even though he was banged up, he was around in spring and we know what he's been all about. I mean, and that's not a knock on Rojas or Campbell, but I mean, we're told that Rojas is full go and by people that we trust, but we have to see it out on the field. And when we talk about Campbell, I mean, the other question mark about him, they list him at 6 feet tall. And I mean, that could be a little bit generous. Now I'm here to tell you that, I covered Mike Hull and he's similar size to Campbell and he was a hell of a player, but does that translate for Campbell as an every down potential player in the Big Ten, which I think you're probably facing some, maybe a different level of offensive line play. So, and everybody else, when we get into the depth aspect, question mark. Now that's fine. I mean, this is going to be a really good defense. I mean, take what I'm saying in perspective, but that is to me why this area is so key. I mean, Keon Wiley, we've seen him working out. He looks huge. I mean, he looks big. Specca, I go back to watching him at the 7-on-7 camps. Every time I mention him, he just looked like a natural football player out there.
You saw him in the weight room. He looks like a man now. I mean, he had a mustache this year. It was kind of iffy, but his physique, I mean, Landon Tengwall pointed out last week, he said, that's the guy that I'm like looking at, pictures of guys in the weight room that's popping off the charts. And I think That's a different thing than he had last year. Last year was a lot about he was fundamentally sound. He was a competitor, but I think it was still, was he up for the wear and tear of Big Ten football? I think that's, he's got to prove it, but I think you make a good point. You make a great
point, Tyler, the 7-on-7 camps.
Yeah.
A lot of times you see linebackers in those things and they're completely lost. I mean, these are passing camps. You know what I'm saying? And he was like, I was like blown away by how good he was in coverage and stuff. And the reason I mention that is because I think that's the most difficult thing for these young linebackers to pick up. I mean, a lot of linebackers who are recruited at this level, you're going to say, go plug a gap and knock somebody's head off, and they're going to do it, right? I mean, that's what they're kind of taught their entire life. You're asking them to drop into coverage and maybe intercept a pass. I mean, that's taken to another level. And didn't we see that with Rojas late last year, right? That's where beginning of the year, he looked kind of lost, and he eventually became that guy who was able to do those things. So when I talk about linebacker being a question mark, that's kind of it. It's like every single person, there's something that you have to wonder about. But again, people, take this with perspective. This has an opportunity to be an elite defense, and I'm nitpicking. We all are nitpicking, and when we get to the other positions, you're going to see how much we're nitpicking.
Yeah, it is a nitpicking process. That's what we're paid to do ultimately.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, again, try to prove that I'm right and you're not on this, Mark, because I think defensive end, when you want to match them up, I think there's a lot more lacking in terms of proven commodities at defensive end. I mean,
you have one really proven commodity. That's what I kind of like.
Yeah, well, you've got to deny Dennis Sutton, and he's done a lot on a football field.
I can't deny that.
And he looked his best playing alongside Zane Durant and Abdul Carter, and they were a force last year in the playoffs. And I think Dennis Sutton is going to be, vie for All-American type status this year. But opposite of him, we were really leaning heavy on Max Granville. And is Max Granville all that different than Anthony Specca? I mean, if we were talking about Anthony Specca being a starting linebacker, that's what we were pretty much talking about with Max Granville. Two blue chip guys came last year, red-shirted, flirted with maybe burn that red shirt. It didn't happen. We're talking about Specca as like the fifth linebacker, battling to be the fourth or fifth linebacker, trying to fight for 15 to 20 snaps a game maybe entering the season. We would have been talking about Max Granville being your starter. And now that we're not, we're talking about Zariah Fisher, a guy who has missed the entire 2024 season, much of the 2022 season, and in between was like your fourth or fifth defensive end. And so, one, we got to see what it looks like when he's playing football again in live action. And two, unlike last time we saw Zariah Fisher playing, he's going to need to play a ton, maybe double the snaps, double the volume. We don't know. I mean, I know he's been around this program 5 years. James Franklin, a lot of people are his fans in there. But again, we're talking about the starter opposite of Dennis Sutton here, a guy who was not part of the plan last year and someone who just hasn't been that starter day to day. And then if you start working your way beyond him, Mark, I mean, Jalen Harvey, Malachi Williams, do they do much for you? I just think it's a real scary proposition for Penn State if you don't have a few guys boom here. And I'm not saying they won't. They've got a lot of talent to work with, and I think Deion Barnes has proven he is a developer of talent. But to me, on surface level, this is more of a priority concern for me at defensive end and being able to disrupt the passer, because look what you could do last year with consistency because you had Abdul Carter. No one expects Zariah Fisher to be able to fill his shoes. No one expects Malachi Williams or Jalen Harvey or Ivan Kamaju to fill his shoes, but it's got to be a group effort. And right now, talking about a group of guys who've done essentially nothing in Big Ten or really even in college competition. Daniel, maybe you can help us make the decision here. I just think when I think about concerns on defense, I think edge rusher right now more than linebacker. That's just kind of because of what I ran through. Just you could at least list a few guys at linebacker who've played 500 plus snaps in their career. I mean, here's Dennis Sutton, and then you're crossing your fingers on just about everybody.
Daniel should go to secondary and say, no.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of your argument, Tyler, one thing that stands out to me is that you can get through a game if you're running this 4-2-5. You can get through a game only playing three linebackers. Just with if Rojas doesn't leave the field, and then some combination of Campbell and DeLuca for your scheme. If you're playing defensive with your defensive line, like you're going to want to run through 4 or 5 guys over the course of a game to rotate people in, keep guys fresh, especially when you talk about a potential 16, 17 game season with the expectations that this team has. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, I think that's where defensive end really stands out to me, because you're going to want Nittany Sutton to still be fresh when you get to January, late December, that time of year. And so you're going to need to rotate guys, keep people fresh, keep going after those offensive tackles on the edge. I think one thing with Zuriah Fisher that stands out to me is that we're coming up on the end of the COVID era in terms of eligibility. I know that the injuries add extenuating factors in there in terms of him getting that 6th year. And so I think the line is a position where if you have someone who has been in college for 6 years, and granted, some of that has been spent rehabbing in different situations, but you're just going to have someone older going up against, potential 2nd, 3rd year offensive tackles. I think that that's something that could be an edge. That's something that you can draw on with Fisher. I mean, looking at him in the spring, like he looks the part, like he looks good, and looks physically ready. So I really like that about him. But yeah, I mean, you're just going to need someone to step up. I mean, that I know that simplifies it a little bit, but someone's just going to have to take the job. I think that this is one of those competitions where it's pretty clear what is at stake. It's clear who are the guys in the running for it and what the stakes are kind of when you talk about what this defense can be. So if you're Jalen Harvey and you're looking at things, there's an opportunity there for you to take. If you're Malachi Williams, there's an opportunity for you to take. And when we get into the games and we see how Penn State rotates through, how they're deploying their defensive ends, it's going to be really clear who took advantage of these opportunities this fall.
I think what stands out to me is this is the position group that has seemingly gotten worse since last January. We've seen them kind of boost all the others. Even when you lose to Tamir Robinson, you think, oh, that's going to be kind of a bad thing for your linebacker room. Well, your counter move is to bring in Amari Campbell, and you feel really good about that. But look, Deion Barnes, when we faced a challenge, you got to replace one of the best defensive players to come through Penn State and Abdul Carter. But then Amin Vanover, his appeal is denied by the NCAA. All of a sudden, he's got to turn focus to the NFL. He wanted to be here as a 6-year senior. And all of a sudden, a few days before spring camp set to open, Smith Vilbert puts his name in the transfer portal. He was here all through winter conditioning. He's supposed to be at least a firm second stringer, if not maybe a starter as a 7th-year guy on campus. He's removed from the equation. And then you say, well, don't worry. We got this kid, Max Granville, and he's going to be freaking awesome. Well, he's off campus, and he gets hurt, and he's out long-term. And so, Mark, I think that's just where I am. I think sure. The trajectory here leaves you wondering, how does Deion Barnes kind of stop that negative momentum? And I'm sure he loves a lot of what he's working with, but in terms of what we can see externally, this is the one position on the roster that I see kind of slipping in its prowess. And again, it's not a slouch of a room. It's not a bad room, but it's when we're nitpicking a national championship contender, it's one that I say, could this be your Achilles heel against an Oregon, against an Ohio State, against an SEC powerhouse down the road in the playoffs? If you don't have a consistent two-way edge rusher system, you can't find that guy, you can't find the solutions. And so I think that's kind of just where I land on this one, being a bit more glaring than others.
Well, what I would say is I think it's a little bit easier to slot in a younger player on a defensive line that has 2 potential first-round draft picks. So I would feel more comfortable. And obviously there's no winner or loser here, but from my perspective, I feel more comfortable with some of these young guys stepping up. We talked about Zuriah Fisher, and I completely agree. I can't say on one hand, we're not sure what we're going to expect from Rojas. And then on the other hand, say, well, yeah, but Zuriah Fisher is going to be tremendous. I will say this, that everybody I've talked to, and I think you guys is probably the same thing, everybody has been super high on him. Yes. Like about, if he's full go, how good that he can be. So I think that part of it is a positive, but it is with the caveat that he's been banged up. But when I'm looking at Zane Durant and Nittany Sutton, I think it's easier to bring along younger players in that environment. As good as Tony Rojas is, I don't think anybody is saying, hey, surefire first-round draft pick. Could he become that? Absolutely. I mean, let's remember, he's only going into his 3rd year playing linebacker, so he has a huge upside. Could some of those younger linebackers emerge as that? Yeah, absolutely. But to me, I think you have those 2 core pieces of the defensive line, and I think it would be easier to bring along younger players. And we'll see. This will be a fun one to revisit like a month into this. Well, maybe 6 weeks into the season, not necessarily the first few games, but seriously, going back and revisiting some of our concerns, once they get through the first couple of tough games that they have to play and see where kind of things stand. Because we know, I mean, how many times have we gone into a season identifying one thing as a potential issue, and it ends up being something completely different. Injuries come into play. And that's where I would say with the D-line, yeah, if Denai Dennis Sutton or Zane Durant get banged up, then it's a completely different story.
And I'll just note here, one of the transfer additions for this team was at defensive end, Anai White. He was a really buzzy name out of high school, Philadelphia. He's now a fourth-year player at the college level. He was only involved for one game last year at Texas A&M, recovering from a serious knee injury. Has not been able to accomplish much in his college career. And we've kind of, told it to you straight about what we've heard, not anticipating him to be a plug-and-play component here in terms of being a first-teamer. Can he battle over the course of August and enter a rotational role? Absolutely. But I think what kind of gets you here with this position is a major gap between these older guys and Adina Sutton and Zariah Fisher. And then all of a sudden you're working down to freshman eligibility. It's like there's a little bit of a missing link there. You got Jordan Mayer, a redshirt sophomore. I thought he did some nice things on the practice field a little bit and some blowout work last year. He came in from Wisconsin last year along with Nolan Rucci. And then, Ivan Kamaju. If these guys aren't careful, this dude will leapfrog a bunch of them and he'll play a bunch. And maybe he's the guy that we get into October and saying he's the solution. But I don't want to put too much, before we actually get to see it for ourselves. And even in a practice with Ivan Kamaju this August. But I will tell you, he is about as high up of a name in this freshman class when you talk to Penn State coaches and players in terms of instant impact potential. So could be
the eyeball test. I mean,
he passes that. Oh yeah.
We saw him in the weight room and it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Let's get over to defensive tackle because as you mentioned, Mark, there are some guys you can probably lean on in that room, starting with Zane Durant. Many consider him to be the top 1, 2, or 3 defensive tackles across college football. Big testament to his growth coming to campus, putting on the weight, been a guy that has been kind of doubted to be an elite level prospect for much of his career. I know that Andrew Ivins, our director of scouting early last season, kind of put out a mea culpa and said, we were wrong to label him a 3-star guy. We had some concerns here and there. They weren't legitimate enough. He should have been a 4-star prospect for us. He has clearly looked the part of a blue chip getting to campus. And now, he's a cornerstone player for you and as disruptive as any defensive tackle that we've seen playing for James Franklin, at least that I have getting here in 2017. And so starting with him and then working around him, Daniel, you got a bit of a battle, it would seem, for that other starting job between someone who hasn't played much and someone who's played a bunch. Alonzo Ford, 2-year starter at Old Dominion, transfers to Penn State, played a bunch last year after missing the 2023 season, but he's sidelined for the entire playoff run. He is full go for preseason camp, big physical presence, a guy that they really like, but his availability has been an issue. And then the other is redshirt freshman Xavier Gilliam, who folks were raving about last year because of what they had with some veteran defensive tackles. They didn't really need to get him involved a ton in game action. He preserved his redshirt status, but he seems to be chomping at the bit to go battle for this thing too. And unlike defensive end, I feel like you can probably feel a little more comfortable about what you've got in that top cluster, like I did at linebacker. You got 3 guys you can probably feel really good about, and then you work off of that. I think you're starting to work through that at defensive tackle, though maybe it's 2.5 because Xavier Gilliam has played 3 or 4 college games.
Yeah, we actually got some clarity on this from James Franklin out in Las Vegas, how he views the pecking order at defensive tackle. During one answer, he was talking about the long season and how you need, in the past, you would need a 2 deep to get through the season. Now he looks at things that you need a 3 deep. And from that, he said that you need 5 defensive tackles to get through the season. And so follow-up question from our friend Greg Pickle at Blue White Illustrated was, do you have 5 defensive tackles? And he said that Penn State does. The top 5 that he laid out were Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford, Xavier Gilliam, Ty Blanding, and Owen Wafel. But he did add the caveat with some of the things that we're talking about in terms of guys stepping up is that some of that is based on potential, that there is an element of projection there when you're talking about, someone like a Gilliam or even a Blanding or a Wafel, guys who have not played or we haven't seen that much on the football field. So I think when you talk about, those 5 and you look at what they're able to do, you've got some different body types in there, some different styles. I think that we were all impressed with what we saw from Ty Blanding in the blue-white game. He was one of the guys that coming out of it that I think maybe we viewed a little bit differently or we learned a little bit more about. So I think that Penn State is in a good spot here, but I do think it will be interesting to see who is out there next to Zane Durant to start a game, or when you were looking through the snap counts on Sunday morning, who was the number 2 snap getter behind Zane Durant, even if they didn't necessarily start. So yeah, I think that this position, it's one of those ones where you lost a lot and you're going to need guys to step up, but you feel pretty good about the guys there that are going to have the opportunity to step up.
Yeah, the quicker, compact type build like we've seen from Zane Durant, that's where you're going to see that kind of model of defensive tackle from Wafel, from Ty Blanding. Blanding's a redshirt sophomore. Wafel's a redshirt freshman. He did not play last year at Michigan, but he's somebody that ran a really impressive 40-yard dash at his size, did a lot of impressive testing across the camp circuit during his high school career, has that athleticism. And so I wonder where some of the bigger bodies come from, because right now this is a room that, I think the heaviest guy is 306. I think last year they entered preseason camp with a few guys in 320s. Some guys have shed some weight. I believe the heaviest guy right now, according to the roster at least, Randy Adarica, freshman, 306 pounds. And I think he's got a chance as the season goes on to maybe make a move and be one of those freshmen who get involved. But my focus more so lands on Liam Andrews, who missed last year because of his injury suffered in high school, was basically in rehabilitation mode throughout his freshman year. But he was a blue chip guy on both sides of the ball. Focuses in on defensive tackle, added about 30 pounds. I think he's right around 290. James Franklin called him big-bodied, and if you walk on the practice field, you can apply that description yourself. He is wide. He takes up a lot of space, and from what I remember about him, his prospect profile and his film, it's a guy who doesn't really have issues moving laterally, getting quick off the snap. And so I wonder how quickly he can put the pieces together now that he has spring ball under his belt. Can he be an ascending piece of this position battle come the second half of August? Or do we maybe need to wait a while for Liam Andrews to really enter that conversation? Caleb Artis is another big body, but he's a redshirt junior. His availability has been in question. We haven't seen him really break through to this point, and James Franklin didn't mention him among those top 5 defensive tackles. So again, I think you get to 5 or 6. I remember last year Tom Allen saying it was the first time in his career, and he felt very fortunate that he was using 5 defensive tackles on purpose. But no, that's a good hit when you had Akeem Beeman step away and Alonzo Ford get hurt. So, Mark, what do you make of defensive tackle? Anything to add in this position group?
Yeah, as you were talking earlier, I remembered that Devin Still was a 4-star defensive tackle recruit out of Delaware in 2007. That's an inside joke, folks. I'm sorry. The guy that we're hearing a lot about is Alonzo Ford. When he first came in here from Old Dominion, he did not look like much of a player, but he's transformed his body. He's been impacted by multiple injuries, but he's another one of these guys where I think if he's healthy, and we're hearing this from coaches and other players, that if he's healthy, he could be a real impact guy for them inside next to Zane Durant. And as we've mentioned, as we've said in this discussion, this is going to be a rotation. It always has been, but I would look for him to be a real key guy. Again, a big if, but that's what preseason camp is all about, tackling some of these ifs. And I'm sorry for going the Delaware route, but I thought you guys would get a kick out of it.
I appreciate it. Mark, I do want to tap into your knowledge on extensive history of Penn State football.
And Delaware.
Last time you recall Penn State entering a season where they had this much of an established force at defensive tackle like they have with Zane Durant, where this guy is clearly a problem that other opposing coaching staffs are dealing with throughout the summer, trying to get ready to handle come season.
Yeah, we talked to Nick Dawkins and out in Vegas, and he was asked he mentioned that Zane Durant is the best defensive tackle that he's faced. And then somebody said, who's the second best defensive tackle? He said, PJ Mustipher. So I think PJ had that kind of cred going into the season, but then obviously he got hurt, right? Out at Iowa. So I'm thinking it was PJ probably, but before
we weren't seeing PJ listed as a top 2 or 3 defensive tackle nationally. I mean, we knew internally as a guy, as a former top 24/7 prospect, big time talent. He was a dude for them. But I mean, where we're talking in August, when you're naming the top players in the Big Ten and someone's pointing to a Penn State defensive tackle.
It may well have been Devin Still. I mean, he was pretty highly rated. Jared Odrick would have been very highly rated, but that's what we're going back to. Yeah. I mean, so it has. It's your point. Your point is well taken, and I inadvertently trying to be a smartass threw Devin Still in there. He might have actually been apropos to the conversation.
Let's jump over to the defensive secondary, fellas. And it's very hard to criticize much about what Terry Smith and Anthony Poindexter have put on the field during recent seasons here at Penn State. I want to begin at the safety spot. And look, Daniel, this is a spot last year where we didn't really get the full picture because KJ Winston was lost early. That meant we didn't get to see as much of Jalen Reed at the second level. And so we saw a ton of Jalen Reed, a ton of ZQ Wheatley, and Wheatley obviously took the next step, lived up to the offseason hype, and he's a guy we'll see. Can he be like a first-team All-Big Ten, maybe flirt with All-American status, make that kind of a jump here in his final year? We don't know, but feel really good about who he is as a real standout player, defender for you. And then you got to match him up with somebody here, and then you got to figure out what maybe the top four are at that position. When you kind of work your way through the options that Anthony Poindexter has at his disposal, what stands out to you?
I think you start with Dejon Lane, just given the track record that he has, the experience he got last year, and how he seems to have, I think, processed his freshman year in terms of the ups and downs, dealing with some of that adversity. That was something that Jalen Reed talked about a lot with watching Lane as a young player handle things. Reed pointed out that near the end of the year last year, he started seeing a little bit more Tyrese Mills in spots that maybe Dejon Lane would have played earlier in the season. So I think that Lane, having that learning experience as a freshman, getting forced into a tough situation, a little bit of a sink or swim thing for him. I think that experience is healthy for him and is something to build off of as he moves forward. I'm really curious how King Mack fits into this room, what he's capable of doing. We know there's so much excitement about him and the type of player that he is, that speed that he brings to the back end. I think that you can do a lot of different things with him. So I think those are the two names that I start with next to Wheatley. I do think that, Vavu Torre can do, he's a different body type than some of these other guys. I think, Tyler, you had it on signing day. His nickname's Hacksaw. He is a heavy hitter.
He's an enforcer. He is an enforcer type safety. Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked what I saw from him in the blue-white game. And then Antoine Belgrave Shorter is somebody else that I think we saw a lot of in the blue-white game and maybe turn some attention. They've got a little bit more attention coming out of it in terms of, someone that maybe not a lot of people were super familiar with, given that he redshirted last year. So I think that he is someone that caught some people's eyes. I think he's an interesting piece back there too. But the main factor, or an interesting factor in this, is where's that fifth defensive back going to come from that is going to be on the field the most? Is it going to be one of these safeties, or is it going to be one of the corners that I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that slot role because that's an important one. It's kind of on its own. You're right. It could borrow from the safety room. It could borrow from the cornerback room. We'll lend our thoughts on that in a second. But I think an important thing for us to keep in mind with Lane is, as much as he played last year, and James Franklin kept saying, teasing that if he takes the next step, he could play a lot more. We never got to that point, but he still burned redshirt. He was the only burned redshirt on defense last year. He didn't get to campus until May or June. He didn't have spring ball under his belt. And so now that he's been on campus for an entire offseason, he's a guy that just sounds so veteran last year, talking to people around the program, that you really don't worry about how he's going to approach his first full offseason. In fact, you figure he'll attack it. And I think Anthony Poindexter has really two very different players here. If you talk about them being the primary battle, in King Mack, who's on the more the shorter side, guy who's always kind of been dinged because he maybe doesn't have that length, but elite speed and a tremendous run defender as well. I wonder if Dejon Lane right now isn't a little bit more of a complete player as a run defender, pass coverage, than King Mack is. We just don't know. We saw King Mack play so much in the slot last year, not a bunch, but when he played for Alabama, largely in the slot. I don't know if, now that we're 2 years into his career, if that is where his highest ceiling is. It really might need to be back deep, wreaking some havoc, lending run support, coming up hard, and doing what he does best. So I think outside of those two guys, I'm really fascinated by those two redshirt freshmen, Babu Torre and Antoine Belgrave Shorter. They can play off of each other a little bit, different skill sets. Torre, I always love when a safety makes everybody think twice before they go reach for the ball. And that's the kind of safety that he can be for you. And ultimately, I know I don't want to forget about Lamont Payne, a guy who started his career at cornerback, made that transition that we've seen a bunch over to safety. Guys like Zeki Wheatley and Keaton Ellis have done it with success. And so he's in year 3 right now. His length is up there with anybody on this team, but where is he as a safety? Is he in that conversation? I think I'll be curious to see where he is in that pecking order right now. But Mark, it starts with Zeki Wheatley. And if he can take another step, he may be the player that nationally people are like sleeping on the most on this entire roster. I know he's gotten plenty of like praise from the coaching staff and here at the local level. And you guys got a chance to talk to him out in Las Vegas. So that says a lot about how they feel from him. But when I see, people listing the top players on Penn State or top players who decided not to enter the draft from Penn State, he's either way down that list or not mentioned at all. And I think he has a chance to really change that narrative and upgrade Penn State's safety outlook from where we are now to where it could be come week 5, week 6, week 7.
Yeah, well, he's the takeaway king, right? I mean, so think about that when people are voting for all Big Ten or trying to figure out all American and that sort of thing. If we saw it late last season, it was a Notre Dame game, right? I mean, if that can translate from him leading, every single spring and preseason camp he's ever been in takeaways. Those are the kind of things that kind of reach out and grab people. But we heard it last year about the maturity level that something kind of clicked with him. And we saw it out there. And I think now kind of he's the guy. I mean, he's been fortunate enough to be playing alongside or even behind some really, really good players, some strong dynamic leaders. And for me, that's the key for him now. He has all the ability in the world. Is he able to emerge as that dynamic leader that they've had, one after another. And I think he has it in him. I really do. And I think he has enough good players around him. One other name I would throw out there, and I don't know that he's going to be a starter, but I could see him sneaking reps here and there is young Dinkins. I mean, he's a guy who's done some things for them. You'll see him on special teams, but I wouldn't discount him. And the other thing I would say at this position is Lane. He is every bit of 6'2". Like he's listed at 6'2", 212. And you would think that he's obviously taller than Amari Campbell, but you would think he's just bigger overall. I think when we get into the discussion of who they can have play some of these different areas, I mean, he's almost big enough that he could play up by the ball almost as a linebacker. So, yeah, but going back to Wheatley, I just think it's all right there for him. And he has the kind of game that really and can do the sort of things that could really turn heads. And I wouldn't be surprised if he has a huge year. If you were to ask me on defense, outside of the two most obvious guys who, I'm hanging my hat on to be the anchor that the defensive line isn't going to be as big an issue as linebacker, who has the best opportunity to be like first team all Big Ten or win all America honors, I would say, Wheatley. I think he has the opportunity to do that with a big year.
Over AJ Harris. What do you say?
Yeah, I do. Seriously, because I think if he has the opportunity, again, you're talking about if the turnovers translate the way that he's been able to do it in practice and whatnot, and that's obviously a big if, but those are the things that kind of grab people's attention.
I'm glad you mentioned Colin Dinkins, who's not so young anymore. He's a redshirt junior all of a sudden.
Well, he's the younger of the Dinkins.
Yeah, he's the younger of them. And we know Khalil's going to play a bigger role at tight end this year. And don't worry, we didn't forget about him. I kind of stashed him away a little bit for our conversation about that slot defender.
Yes.
Because that's where we really seen him kind of gravitate toward and kind of make his own on the practice field. He's a guy who was kind of flirting with that job a little bit last year. Ultimately, a lot of what we heard about Colin Dinkins and last offseason didn't really come to fruition in the defensive backfield in the form of defensive reps, but I think he was over 180 snaps on special teams. So yes, he has played a lot of football and he's in that conversation. I think right now, though, it's going to be hard to displace the guy who finished in that role last year in Zion Tracy. An electric athlete. We've seen him a bit at punt returner. Didn't get to see the athleticism flash as much as maybe we'd hoped on special teams, but he is one of the more impressive football players on this entire team, and broke through as a perimeter cornerback early in his career. But I think he really sank his teeth into that role in the slot last year, showed the physicality, and ultimately he supplanted Cam Miller. It was kind of a Cam Miller job / timeshare for the first half of the season. You look at the final stretch last year into the playoffs, Zion Tracy is your starter in that role. Occasionally they would start a third linebacker. Often, though, they would start Zion Tracy. So, Daniel, when you look at the conversation about who's going to be that fifth defensive back, Zion Tracy obviously coming out of the cornerback room. I mentioned Colin Dinkins. He's listed as a safety. He was a cornerback early in his career. But there are other cornerbacks, and I think the other one that probably we got to pull into this conversation most is Kenny Wosley, because this is also where they see a strong fit. I remember talking to Alan Zamitis, former All-American cornerback for Penn State, now a recruiting director, on signing day after they signed Wosley, and he said, go watch this kid's highlight film and go watch his high school tape, and you see him playing all over the place, but he really flourishes as a slot cornerback at the high school level. And he said, you need a PhD at cornerback to look that good in the slot. So mindset-wise, they felt tremendous where he was, a little bit on the lankier side when he came to campus last year, worked on that. And right now, I think he's the guy that I would probably say more than King Mack and probably just as much as Colin Dinkins perhaps could give Zion Tracy a run for that job. But I think it's Zion Tracy's job. But we got some really interesting second halves of football coming our way in non-conference play. So I think we'll get to see some of the other names in that role and maybe make a case for themselves.
Definitely. I think that you feel comfortable penciling in Tracy to be that first nickel. Like I said, it's going to be interesting to see like when they deploy three safeties, when they deploy three corners, situational things like that. Like I think last year we saw with that Lion package that on first and second down, you've got Jalen Reed, playing down, close to the line of scrimmage. And then in, the passing situations, one of the safeties, I think it was Wheatley, would go off and then Tracy would come on, be in the slot. I think we saw a little bit of that early on. So we'll see what this looks like. But I think Kenny Wosley is intriguing guy in terms of what kind of steps can he take forward and what kind of position can he put himself in to be a contributor there. Talking to him, he's a person that really has it all together. Very smart, very cerebral, very personable. And I think that that's reflected a little bit in his style of play. Like you said, the PhD in cornerback. So yeah, I think this slot position will be interesting, and deploying safeties, deploying cornerbacks, different situations. It's going to be different opponents too. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to follow along with.
I'll be curious to see how much these guys are maybe implemented as blitzers and pass rushers too. I remember Johnny Dixon a couple years, back-to-back years, was like the lead sacker among all cornerbacks in college football. Even Daquan Hardy at his size made an impact in the backfield. I certainly think they have the guys who can do that here as well. When we look on the perimeter at cornerback, Mark, I don't know if you can believe it, but Terry Smith, former Penn State receiver, is now in year 12 as cornerbacks coach here in Happy Valley. He has been a mainstay on the James Franklin staff, and for good reason when you look at the production that they've gotten at cornerback, the play, and the prospects that they put into the NFL at the end of their Penn State careers. And Terry Smith loses a guy they liked a lot last year in Jalen Kimber, brought him in from Florida. I think that he was better than they even anticipated when they brought him in as a transfer. Now he's an NFL rookie, but you lose him and you still got the other transfer you brought in last year who started every game in A.J. Harris. Elliott Washington had a monster offseason by all accounts, played really good football when he was available last year for the most part as a sophomore. And then on Davian Collins, known as Squirrel around team facilities, he went from, everyone talking about he was going to break out last year. Then we went through the first half of the season and it was like, well, what the heck, man? Where's Davian Collins? Come second half of the season, some injuries elsewhere, he gets some opportunities, and we start to figure out, okay, now we see what they saw in this young man in the practice field, and now we're seeing it in game action. And so, again, you get to a spot where you can really confidently list three guys who've done it in game action. Collins not quite as extensively, but I think this is now his third year since his transfer from Mississippi State. Guys who have been under Terry Smith's wing for a long time. And A.J. Harris, like I mentioned earlier, he's getting as much buzz as anybody on defense. PFF, Pro Football Focus, just listed him as their number one cornerback prospect for the 2026 NFL Draft.
Yeah, and I wonder if A.J. Harris isn't going to fall victim to what we saw with Joey Porter Jr. a couple of years ago, where nobody would throw at him; they were going the other way. And that's when I talk about Wheatley being able to maybe establish some more eye-popping numbers. You can't really avoid the safety, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see them maybe avoid him. But yeah, Elliott Washington. And the thing about Elliott Washington is it wasn't just on field stuff. It was the workouts, it was the weightlifting, it was the running. He set a record, was it for defensive back of the day or whatever? What was it called?
He went 6 for 6, right? In winter workouts, defensive back. I also think I might need an updated. I think he has the highest miles per hour recorded out there on the field as well among Penn State football players.
Yeah, so I think you have two guys who you know what you're going to get. I remember talking to Terry Smith at Media Day last year, and that's where the whole squirrel thing came out about Davian Collins, and they were super, super high. But again, I think you never know what's going to happen. Somebody gets nicked, something happens, but I know that they're extremely high on him, and he has the opportunity to do something. So Terry Smith is just one year after another. It's like Poindexter at safety. They've just done a really nice job of churning and keeping these guys, the pipeline going at both of those positions. AJ Harris, will he be the guy to break the long streak? Let's not even talk about it, okay? Because every time we think we know who that guy is going to be, right? The first Penn State defensive back ever to go in the first round. Every time we think it's going to happen, it doesn't happen. So we'll mention that now, but then we'll let it go. Well, you guys could mention it, but I'm going to let it go for the rest of the year, and hopefully it happens for AJ Harris, because he's been I will tell you, the thing about AJ Harris is not only is he a really good player, but he is so much fun to talk to and interview, and the way he carries himself. I know I'm going off track here a little bit, but sometimes I think we just assume people know what these guys' personalities are all about. And when you talk about a Penn State guy, I know he didn't start his career at Penn State, but you could see why he ended up being such a good fit.
Yeah, he's got a lot figured out. Former 5-star high school recruit, ended up signing with the reigning national champions, Georgia Bulldogs, burned red shirt there as a freshman, ends up at Penn State. And I think, Daniel, what I've loved about Terry Smith's room development year by year is the blend of transfer talent. Johnny Dixon comes to mind. We're talking about Davian Collins, of course, now, and AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber last year. But also, there's always someone coming up the pipeline, and you've got that this year. You've got a couple freshmen that I think could burn redshirt. And in fact, me and Tyler Calvarusa both had them listed among our top 5 impact freshmen a couple of weeks ago, and Jameer Joseph and Darius Dixon. Dixon, to me, is the number one on my list, battling it out with Ivan Kamaju for guys who are going to get on the field, burn redshirt, and then play a bunch as freshmen. But I think in those two guys, the body types, the mental makeups, the competitive drive, they have two legitimate blue chip cornerbacks that they brought to campus. And they've got other players that they like a lot, Josh Johnson, Xavier Thomas. But those two guys to me stand out and kind of match up what we've seen from Terry Smith in the past. If a guy looks like he's ready to roll, there will be zero hesitancy. We'll see him maybe get 15 snaps or so in non-conference play, get a lot of special teams work, and then we'll see where he's at by the end of the season. I think it's exciting because Terry Smith has, again, a formidable trio up top, but don't lose focus on those freshmen, because I think Dixon and Joseph are guys who we could be talking about as starting potential in 2026.
Certainly. And I think that if you're Penn State, you're going to have to build that depth there. The way that you look at going into the season, I think the way that, or coming out of the spring, the way that it looked to us at corner is that AJ Harris, Elliott Washington, and Davian Collins are all going to play starter level reps. I sounded like it would be like Harris and Washington would be the first two out there, but you're going to see a lot of those three rotating through. And so, but you're going to need more than 3 cornerbacks on the outside to get through a game. And if these guys are ready, we're going to see them. I think about it a lot, where in that game against Michigan in 2021, my first year on the beat, there's that long touchdown pass that was the game winner for Michigan. They had Kalen King out there as a true freshman. He didn't start, but he would rotate in, and they weren't afraid to put him on the field in big spots. So I think guys like Dixon and Joseph will be on the field in spots like that, and we're going to learn a lot about them, I think, pretty quickly when they're in those situations.
Mark, we've gone over a lot. Anything else to add on the defense before we close up shop on this episode?
Yeah, you got me thinking. Who was the last Penn State defensive tackle to be drafted into the NFL?
Drafted. Wasn't Kevin Givens. It wasn't PJ Mustipher. Oh man, is this before my time? It might be.
No, it's before Daniel's time.
before Daniel's time. Was Robert Windsor selected? That's it?
2020. Okay. Good get. Wow. I didn't think you would come up with that. I'm impressed.
Don't doubt me. Anything else to add aside from that interesting note?
No, but I mentioned it before, and we had a good-natured back and forth about it. But it is going to be fun a month into the season, a month and a half into the season, to kind of revisit some of these things on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. It's really good to have these discussions now as camp is starting, because we're just drilling so deep into it. I think it's even good for us to kind of refocus and reset where everything is and going over. But overall, I just think defensively, we're to the point now where we have to nitpick, because I think it's going to be a very, very, very good defense. And when we're talking about potential shortcomings, it's things that would not have been maybe considered shortcomings 10 years ago when Franklin first took over the program and it was in a much different position. So I think they're in a really good spot, have a good defensive coordinator. And as you guys know, Dan Connor, high on him, Deion Barnes, high on him. And I think Penn State has as good a pair of secondary coaches as there is in the nation.
Yeah, so a lot of pieces in place for success this season. Daniel, anything to add on to that?
No, I think that it's a theme where this is a very well constructed roster, and it's hard to find some holes there. But guys are going to have to step up, and it's going to be fun to follow that this during camp and into the early season.
Yeah, and then we'll learn some new wrinkles from Jim Knowles along the way. Is he going to bring that hybrid position that's been called the Leo in the past? Where it's a defensive end linebacker hybrid. Where's that fit in? Some new nuances that we'll start to pick up. Probably not until these teams in game action and going up against a real opponent. But we will see this team compete against each other on Saturday. Whatever drills, whatever position work, whatever action we see, you'll hear about at Lions247.com. We will get you practice notebooks from both sides of the ball on Saturday. We'll also have a ton of commentary from James Franklin, Penn State's coordinators, a variety of players. We are all in on Penn State coverage. We always all are, but it takes a new level on Saturday. We're bringing Tyler Calvaruso into town. We'll have Grace Brennan there. And so it's all hands on deck for us at Lions247.com. Remember that special deal going on right now. Brennan, remind them again what we got going on at Lions247.
50% off an annual subscription to Lions247. It gets you all of our premium content. Access to everything on our message board, where people know a lot of the stuff that's on there are premium posts, and it's just a really good value. I know that we have people who are monthly subscribers. Thank you for being a monthly subscriber, but you can take advantage of this and save yourself some money. The other thing I want to point out, I stole this from Beaver Stadium at James Franklin's last press conference, and I figured I would hold it till now. I'm just kidding. I actually bought this myself, but we will be seeing the Blue Gatorade Saturday. Be ready for it.
Right back where we belong. We'll talk to you all soon here on the podcast. We'll have a lot to go through for our first episode next week, coming off of that trip to team facilities, and a lot of coverage over at Lions247.com between now and then. On behalf of Daniel Gowan and Mark Brennan stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.